Mi Yo Futuro con Diego Valero. Síguenos en Spotify, iVoox y Apple Podcast.
One of the main criticisms of the use of nudges, those little pushes that help us make better decisions, is that they can be a form of manipulation and that there can also be a lack of equity in their application, especially in more vulnerable groups. Your latest book is called Nudging Democratized. Stephen, what does it mean to democratize nudges?
Yes. So when I used the term democratizing nudges, it was really about kind of like increasing the awareness of how companies and organizations apply behavioral science. When I first started that book, this was when there was very few kind of commercial implementations of behavioral science. And so that was rather than having just all the concentrated need, and you always need this sort of specialized knowledge of behavioral science, I thought it was helpful to, have organizations have some sort of holistic view about applying behavioral science. And, there's many different ways that could happen. So I tried to shed light on different models, and including models regarding ethics and how, different people are, different groups of people are addressed. And so that was the notion of nudging democratized. It was kind of like making that more accessible, making it something that's not so much like a mystic art, if you will, but shedding more light. So that's the backdrop.
Thank you. Stephen Shu is professor of practice of behavioral economics at Cornell University, where he's as well the academic director of the SIMS Master International Management Program, and is one of the world's leading experts in behavioral science. But Stephen is bachelor and master's in electrical engineering and holds an MBA from the University of Chicago and a PhD in behavioral finance from the City University of London. Steve, welcome to My Future Self.
Yes.
And
thank you very much.
Although you explain it in your book, Inside Nudging, tell us how an electrical engineer ends up being an expert in behavioral sciences.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess like if you're around long enough, maybe many things could happen. But my colleague, Shlomo Benartzi, who I understand you had recently on the podcast, he described my career path as a bit of a drunken man career path. I like to say it more like that I have like an appetite for variety, but, I did start as an electrical engineer. My specialty was in an area of signal processing and neural networks, which was like the precursor to all this AI stuff. Before we had the AI winter where there was like not enough computing power to actually perform some of the things that we were studying. And after that, I did go to kind of work in telecom for a while. And my path there was, I really wanted to get more involved with either managing or investing in technology companies. So I shifted out of engineering to get an MBA at Chicago. And that was the late 90s when I was first exposed to judgment and decision-making at Chicago. People like Richard Thaler was there. And I actually, by accident, kind of like took this as a concentration within the MBA. I after the MBA, I kind of went to management consulting, kind of the traditional path for people out of MBA. And there's two paths you could take there. One is kind of cost reduction, or two is kind of growing revenues. And so then I started this path of basically developing a reputation for starting new initiatives within companies. And so all along this backdrop, there was kind of the nudging kind of developing. And then in sort of 2008, 2009, the book Nudge came out, and it sort of popularized behavioral science in people's minds. And while there were like a number of organizations that applied it in the public sector, there were essentially no commercial organizations at the time. And I had been sort of developing this expertise of starting new initiatives in company. And then I ran into Shlomo Benartzi in Los Angeles, and we were at I think it was the Lux Sunset Boulevard, right by the 405, and we had our very first meeting there. And there was this concept that he had about starting a behavioral finance institute at Allianz Global Investors. And so I kind of brought my skills in terms of starting new initiatives within companies and sort of getting a new vision implemented. And we had very complementary skills to kind of bring that to market. So that's where I first kind of landed in behavioral economics. And we worked together for another 13 years, got my PhD along the road, worked with a lot of different companies. And, the state of the world is quite different now. So it's quite a turn of events, I guess.
Okay, great. So let's turn to behavioral economics in depth. Your work, Stephen, has illuminated the intricate ways in which human psychology intersects with economic decision-making, as you said. Let's start with the basics. Could you explain to our audience what behavioral economics is and why it's so crucial for understanding our behavior, especially in the field of economics and finance?
Yeah. So, in a popular setting, I guess that I'd say the boundaries of behavioral economics are a little bit fuzzy. I suppose if I talk in different circles, it would be extremely precise, but it's really kind of the intersection of psychology and sort of traditional economics, and in more plain English, it's kind of this tension between kind of like how we decide versus, how we should decide, if you will. We behave differently than perhaps we should. And so it's really all about kind of understanding those differences in specific situations. So, and finance is very broad, so we'll take it wherever you'd like to go there. But obviously there's near-term things regarding like spending and day-to-day living, and then there's longer things, more complex problems that have very different types of issues, and they have to be broken down into smaller problems with different sort of tensions and how we decide versus how we should decide.
Okay, and building on that, it's clear that our financial decisions are often influenced by cognitive and emotional biases.
Yes.
Could you share some common biases that affect our financial planning, and in which way we can overcome them?
Yep. So, financial planning is kind of a broad area, but I think about it kind of in, 4 areas. One is sort of, you have to understand sort of the problem complexity. Things like deciding how much to save today might be a more simple, at some level, simpler decision than when you've retired, you have no income coming in. You have to figure out how you're going to live the rest of your retirement. So there's problem complexity. I think there's also different levels of people's experience with things. Some things they're very familiar with. They get a lot of feedback. Other things that people have not experienced before. And so different levels of user experience. I think there's also the notion of people have different goals and preferences. So there's this individuality of things. And then there's this whole notion of uncertain outcomes. So each of those areas have issues. I guess if we were to take like the first one on like problem complexity, a lot of it is, either getting help from the environment or really decomposing problems into smaller issues. Like in the case of saving for retirement, we've often thought about like, should you participate, first of all, is the first issue. Second issue might be, how do you make sure you're saving the right amount? And then the third might be, how do you know whether you're putting your investments in the right place? And so I think this is one issue, is really think about kind of decomposing the problem and making sure that you understand that. And then another level is just being honest about kind of your the experience with the area, and maybe you need to get feedback from people that know you or input from other people that are kind of experts in the area. And then the area of goals and preferences, I think there's when you decide to do something, you should really ask, why is it? Try to get back to the root cause of why is it? Is it really that you want to have a lot of money at retirement? I mean, you can't take it with you. Is it more that you want a particular lifestyle? Is it about control? It was freedom to see your kids. There's going to be some level of why. And so I think really understanding those goals is an important piece. And then the uncertain outcome is always a tricky one, because I think you have to be in this mindset of having that things can turn out different ways. I mean, whenever I go to see like these movies with the Marvel movies with the multiverses, I get this so confused. I have, and it's very difficult for the brain to kind of think about multiple outcomes and multiple paths. But it is something for these that you need to do, that things could turn out very differently.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me quote a few words from Richard Thaler in his Nobel banquet speech. What I do to get here. I discovered the presence of human life in a place not far away where my fellow economists thought it did not exist, the economy. I always find this a fantastic definition of behavioral economics, and I use in my classes and lectures. But you mentioned Thaler himself, as well as Kahneman and Tversky, as great references for you. Although to some extent the influence of behavioral on economics comes from the time of Adam Smith, and more recently with the also Nobel laureate Herbert Simon, there is now an unprecedented explosion of behavioral science. Academics such as the aforementioned, or our common friend Shlomo Ben-Arzi, Katie Milkman, and as you said, both Thaler and Ben-Arzi have been protagonists of this podcast, and Katie will be soon, I hope. Herzfeld, Leibson, Lowenstein, Kammerer, Suzanne, and yourself are great references of this discipline. Why do you think this is happening, and why now?
Yeah. I mean, it's taken a while to emerge. You made good points about like decades and decades of like foundation. And, I think while we've had this kind of judgment and decision making and all this background in psychology and economics, it really started to open with the book Nudge. But I think, at least in my mind, that's kind of started there, that we really came to public awareness that there could be an actual application. It was not just like cute things that we could talk about. And it became at least a seed of sort of being, applied. And there was probably, I don't remember exactly how many, but there was, tens, maybe no more than 150 like organizations that were in the public sector that were implementing things. But I think, also we have to consider kind of the research circles and the labor pools. I mean, the research circles in behavioral science came from all different areas: psychology, economics, sociology, and the schools are really organized by area and department, marketing and strategy. And it's only been fairly recently, maybe in the past decade, where, organizations like UCLA and Chicago, they started creating these behavioral decision-making groups. And as a consequence of that, we also started seeing more people getting trained in that and more labor being in the market. When we first started, it was pretty scarce to find people. You'd have to look kind of worldwide, and to some extent, you still have to do that. But I think there's been a lot more training, and I think, the sort of cross-discipline has made kind of, more available labor. And then I think it does help to have these sort of boutique or niche behavioral science consultancies, companies like yourself and others that are, as evidence is shown in other areas, when we first had like accounting, and we had strategy, we had thought leaders, and we have sort of these niche boutique kind of consultancies helping to kind of pave the way and introduce new ideas to organizations that are, they're worried about their companies operating day to day, and it's at a little bit of can be an insular view. So it's sometimes helpful to have kind of bring in that outside view, catalysts that can help kind of change. So I think it's a series of things coming together, labor pool, public awareness of that, and then some of the organizations that can help kind of catalyze the application. That's my take.
Yeah. No, in fact, regarding that, of course, it is present in all areas of business in the companies. In that sense, do you think companies should incorporate behavioral economics principles into their procedures? And in that case, in which way, broadly or just in specific areas? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, do I think it can be applied broadly? Of course, I'm biased. I'm an imperialist. I think that, I mean, behavioral economics is human behavior. And so, it affects end user decision making, as well as kind of the managerial decision making. When I teach the applied course, I will say that I tend to focus on kind of product development, data science, product marketing, entrepreneurship, kind of consulting, where I think younger generations can, kind of make an impact. But I do think that the concepts can be pursued widely. I mean, I think that companies, they can start with kind of like a whiteboard to figure out where they want better outcomes for people. And then how might we approach that? And then, to what extent can it make sense to apply kind of behavioral science, and can we stretch the thinking and ideate? Probably most organizations, I would say, should pick an anchor area and then experiment with maybe a few others. I think that behavioral science is kind of this thing that, behavior is complicated, and you're not the first project's not going to necessarily be the biggest win. It could be a small win, and you want to have kind of a portfolio of approaches. But realistically, I think companies should start in an anchor area, or, a small number that they can manage and watch carefully, because there's this whole organizational learning process too that you want to get the details right.
Yeah, I fully agree. My experience is as you have told, because it's necessary to have maybe a quick win, a small win maybe, but a quick win to share the results with the rest of the organization. Let's move to retirement and pensions, if you don't mind. Your work
absolutely
has significantly contributed to our understanding of how behavioral economics can improve retirement outcomes. Given the demographic shifts and the challenges of longer lifespans, how can behavioral economics help individuals better prepare for retirement?
Yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, for preparing for retirement is kind of like a marathon, but I do think that there are pieces that are, a marathon you actually have to run constantly. There's probably some areas, if you do the right thing, you can glide a good part of it. Like, for example, if you make get in place kind of your way to handle emergencies in place, and then start thinking about what is the healthy thing to save for retirement. If you set kind of those savings rates and you watch out for all these hazards along the way, like, withdrawing the money, or, getting tempted and watching the market too carefully and getting conservative and, moving into cash, and then all of a sudden forgetting about it and having problems with, getting returns. I think there are hazards along the way. So, I think that's one thing, is it's to address the larger set of folks. I mean, I think we have to continually find ways to make it easier for people to make the right choice. And I think that, it's kind of a complicated process to address in the large. I mean, in the States, I mean, we have some definite, I'm sure in all the different countries, you have different points of view on what is the outlook on your own contributions to savings, to what extent is there contributions from your company, what is going to happen with the state pensions. And so I think that, but broadly speaking, even I work with the students here, it's like very few have an understanding of that whole process.
Yeah.
And they're quite smart. So I would say that we have to make kind of the right choices very easy for folks and get information to folks. And we have to do sort of more research on these underserved populations. One of the studies that Shlomo Benartzi and I did, along with Hal Hirschfield and Rick Mason, was kind of was motivated by the notion of maybe savings in terms of percentage of salary.
Yeah.
Percentage is a very abstract concept and potentially difficult for people who are less numerate and maybe have lower income. And so are there ways to reframe that decision in a way that's more relatable? We tried reframing savings as how many pennies for every dollar that you earn, so people could actually think about that. And we found that we could actually get those with lower income to save at a rate closer to what was, sort of the economically recommended kind of thing for their income band, if you will. So,
yeah, I guess it's a matter of make things easy, of course, and understandable. One of the main problems in pension systems as a whole, especially in countries like mine, where most pensions are financed by a pay-as-you-go system, many people argue they're not keeping pace with the changing nature of work and longevity. How do you envision, in that case, behavioral economics shaping the future of pension systems to make them more resilient and responsive to our needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very tricky issue. I mean, there's I think one is, the changing nature of work. For example, when I started, I was like one of the only people that like sort of worked outside of the office that was in a traditional kind of role. It was mostly the salespeople and the traveling folks. And we have like an increasing number of folks that are kind of working kind of outside of that sort of social infrastructure and, also working on gig economy type jobs. And so I think we do have to provide more access to vehicles that make it easy for people who don't have like the traditional pensions to do that. I think we have to constantly look for even the stuff that we worked on back at Allianz with sort of a framework for getting people to save more and save smarter. Still, a lot of companies, there can still be progress simply using those frameworks. And then, I think this notion of addressing differences in people and, how we address kind of longevity and people's perspectives on life. I think we have to bring that into focus a bit more. I think, people have different various states of health when they're in later in life. I've been focusing a lot on like how to now that I ran into a book on longevity, so I'm constantly working on sort of the cognitive aspect, the cardio aspect, the cancer risks, and I constantly think about how to manage that. And hopefully I'll be the kind of person that will have a longer life, and I want to plan for that, but it could turn out very differently. Now, I guess the other thing I was going to say is we need to have. So actually, two more things. One was I think we do need more research. Like there hasn't been enough research on sort of the heterogeneity of populations, those with lower numeracy, and specifically on pensions. And then the other thing I was going to say is, we need to bring in kind of this next generation of leaders who really value these things and say that, we're going to make actual progress and reward these things. And we have to have the better balance between like looking for sort of the next quarter's financials and making legitimate steps that will pay off, right? If we, in the long run. So I don't know. There's going to be multiple approaches to addressing underserved populations. Sustainability, it's going to come through leadership, more research, more collaborations between actual academia and kind of organizations to advance these things, and kind of the reward structures. I think we have to constantly think, because we're very pressed by the here and now, and how do we make the money the next quarter and not spend too much, and may not be doing the right things sort of long term.
We fortunately we have many followers from Latin America, where for example, sustainability and inclusion are becoming increasingly important in pension systems.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, what role do you think behavioral economics will play in ensuring these systems are sustainable and inclusive, particularly for underserved populations?
Yeah. I mean, we'll have to set that as like a goal, first of all, I think is the main thing. And then I think we have to have a point of view on kind of what is the right thing for those underserved populations. And then I think it will be that we'll have the smart people that come together to figure out what are these obstacles to getting the right behavior. Maybe it's capabilities in some sense. Maybe it's a numeracy. Maybe it's sometimes just confidence. And, we'll have some people that are, I use an example also where, in some areas, we have also a big educational shift, like in the U.S., where there's actually a lot more females coming into the schools. And instead of there being a majority of males in schools, you have like a majority of females, maybe 65%. But historically, females have sometimes been, they have strong capabilities, but maybe they have lacked confidence. Yeah. And it could be because of role models. It could be a number of things. And so I think once we understand those obstacles and we realize some of these goals, there's ways of addressing them, finding more role models, and highlighting those role models. And so it takes, I don't know if there's any quick wins in this area, but we do need to focus on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's shift to technology. AI is already a reality in our days. You have made mention in some of your posts of ChatGPT, I think sarcastically, saying that if your students use the chat for their papers, you will use it to correct them.
Yes.
Yeah, but especially you have commented about the differences between ChatGPT and humans, about the biases that chat can also have, and how framing affects it. What are your latest insights on the development of ChatGPT and AI in general?
Yeah. I mean, at a high level, I think that these platforms are good for automating tasks that, require too much labor or require too much deep reflective thinking to kind of get over a big hurdle just because of the nature. For example, it's kind of challenging for me to come up with like 100 multiple choice questions for an exam. It takes a lot of thought and it takes a lot of writing to get it right. And on the other hand, if I think about like the learning objectives and kind of what I'm teaching and how I want the structure to be and who the audience is and what are the test parameters, you can quickly get like 1,000 some questions. The key thing is for consideration. I mean, you can't necessarily trust what is coming out of AI, but it can it's something that you can chat with, you can get a lot of ideas from, and you kind of need these kind of human reviews. And, I don't know if we know all the full possibilities about, how can use it. People are using it for summarizing text streams, customer care transcripts, qualitative data. And I think, so on the one hand, there's all these business use cases that are unknown. On the other hand, sort of another stream has been looking at specifically sort of the core decision making, and like platforms like ChatGPT and Google Bard, now Google Gemini, Microsoft Bing, now Microsoft Copilot. I got a bunch of Cornell alums and some Cornell faculty and some students, and we did some kind of testing on traditional kind of things that have been tested on humans, and we wanted to better understand kind of like, well, how does AI think about it? Does it inherit all the same biases that we have? Because it seems like it should. It's trained on the human data. And so we came up with this observation that at least based on early testing with across the platforms, that there were some areas where AI had kind of this inside view. It was problematic which could be problematic, I should say, because it holds similar biases to what we have. And so if we're kind of making decisions in conjunction with AI, we could, run into the same problems. And those, some of those areas were like around framing, how a problem was framed. Also the tendency to confirm biases as opposed to looking to alternative explanations. And then there was more of an outside view or a complementary view in things like availability biases and sort of reflective thinking biases. Availability biases, like, I ask you, like, what's this wasn't the test, but availability biases, like, what's more likely for you to get killed by a shark attack or a falling plane part? And people's, in their minds, a shark attack is very vivid. They've probably heard it on the news. It's very available in memory. We think that's more likely, when in actuality, getting hit by a falling plane part is times more likely, or something like that.
Yeah.
And AI tends not to fall subject to these types of biases, and so it can be helpful in that sense. Surprisingly, we didn't find that it had certain biases like in the endowment effect or sunk costs, which humans also show a lot of. So I think when you consider like these strengths and weaknesses of the platforms, I think we'll get to a better understanding of, cases when AI should be brought in the loop, when humans should be in the loop. And, I think we can make it a very useful technology. And be aware of kind of the new blind spots that we'll have.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, these tools it can be useful to improve, for example, our financial behavior. But again, we run the risk of not reaching the entire population. In that way, how can we also democratize the use of technology?
Yeah. I mean, I think one is, we have to think about kind of awareness. I think, first of all, awareness of these technologies. I mean, I think there's still people that, even within the business school, we talk about it abstractly. They've never seen the technology used in particular ways. And so I think one is kind of exposing people to that. I think there is the access issue also. I mean, we have this notion of, we've had discussions even at Cornell. It's like, if we have, a subscribed platform, or the students who have money going to be able to do better work than those who don't. So should we make some investment to make it available to all? And so I think access is a key kind of awareness and use cases. And then, I think there's going to have to be an understanding of the limitations of these things. We also have to make it a bit easier to use. Some of the technologies are, you have to set up an account on another platform and then set up an account on this platform and purchase tokens. And then there's a usage thing. And so it becomes this barrier that if you know how to get through that sort of trail, then you can use it, but others can't.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, Stephen, I feel I could spend hours and hours talking with you, but unfortunately, it's time to conclude this tango that we dance with our guests.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your time. It has been a big pleasure to have you in the podcast. However, our last question to our guest is always the same. How do you envision your future self?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I made a big switch to kind of be in this role to, working 30 years in industry and kind of moving to academia. I think I would like to continue kind of, since there's been this explosion in AI and decision making, I do want to work in that. And so I do look forward to like partnering, working with commercial organizations in this area. My vision for my future self is a little bit fuzzy, but I would like to work on things that kind of like improve the world. The UN has strategic development goals, and I'm kind of in the stage of my career of leaving a legacy. So I can't say this is exactly what I want to be, but it's kind of where I want to go.
So please do it.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And to our audience, we hope today's conversation with Professor Stephen Shu has inspired you to think differently about your economic and financial behavior and take advantage of the suggestions that Professor Shu has given us to improve our life. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you.